like one major blocker for crypto adoption and scale is that crypto people are so fucking weird.
The behavior that you're saying is not the first two groups, it's just the cultists. And the issue with people like Sailor is that they're really good at tapping into the cult mentality because they're a fucking narcissist.
And we're back. um, so we had last time we had Andre Staltz, and that was our first guest. First things first. I wonder what you thought about that. How was kind of the how did the dynamic work with a guest involved? And what was your overall feeling?
It was fun. I didn't have to rant nearly as much to keep things going. So that's good progress. And I think Andrew actually brought us a perspective that we don't usually get, including that he seems to see the world with even rosier colored lenses than you do. So that's a good balance.
That that's true. He's very optimistic. Which is kind of interesting because he is Brazilian, but then he lives in Finland. So maybe there's something there. One thing we didn't talk about that I find really interesting about him is that he basically lives off of Patreon and grants, right? Which is a really interesting model for building open source. And I know of a lot of different projects, like small single person projects that do that quite successfully. And I've never really quite like found what I think about it in a real sense. Like the one that comes to mind is Objective C, which you may know if you use Macs. Basically, just builds a whole bunch of like security software, small security tools like things that flag if there's something going on in your network traffic, when your video comes on, things like that.
Oh, Objective C, yes.
Yeah, like
Yeah, I know him.
yeah. Yeah, he's really great. And he has sort of same model. And I've always wondered whether that is sort of like it's a very altruistic model, kind of, and sort of relying on the altruism of others, which is a very nice thing. But what always terrifies me a little bit is that it is very sort of dependent on whims and things that are not in your control. And maybe the argument is that that's always the case, but the nice thing about it is that they really don't have any sort of like corporate pressure to over monetize or do anything like that, as long as they're getting enough in these grants and donations. What do you think about that stuff?
Yes. Well, actually, if anyone is curious, Andre has this really great article from, I think, 2019 called Open Source Below the Poverty Line, which is great stuff, great analysis of how basically the more visible a project is, the more likely it is to get money, even if it is not a foundational project. So something that is 3 layers down the stack might be used by a whole ton of projects and get only a fraction of what one of those single projects receives. So it's fascinating to see that even this project still depend on visibility. Now, I agree that you're always depending for funding on things that are not entirely within your control, right? I mean, you run a company where you do business and you build stuff for others, right? You can't go and put a gun to their heads and force them to just give you money. But at the very least, you know which doors you can go knock on in order to get this funding, right? Andrew seems to have this figured out on the sense that at the very least, there's the way that he described it, there's a clear narrative for why something like Manyverse and Secure Scuttlebutts are aligned with the interests of the European Union. So he has a door to go knock on, let's say. But I think for the vast majority of open source developers, it's significantly trickier, particularly when you are building something that is very much at infrastructure level and can't necessarily trivially justified. I mean, remember the whole Heartbleed thing with OpenSSL that it had. Well, was it? I think it was like one developer full time, and they were paid like a janitor's salary for intents and purposes until Heartbleed happened. I actually gave a talk in 2019 motivated by Andrew's article called Supporting the. It was at an open source focus event, right? There were people who self-identify as open source supporters and who are there just to talk about supporting open source. And I remember basically asked people to raise their hands first if they had donated. I think it was if they had donated to an open source project, and it was about a third of them that raised their hands. Then I told them to keep their hands up if they had done it in the last 3 months, and about half the hands went down. So at this point, we're at like 15%. And the last thing was if you're doing this on an automatic recurrent basis, right? Not that it was an one-off, but you would give like $10 every month. I don't think it was even 5% of the people there. You know, we need to get significantly better at supporting the people that build all the shit we use. We don't want to just be dependent on the whims of the Googles and Apples and God save us Facebooks of the world.
Yeah. Well, this is the big sort of problem, is that you have all this incredibly valuable stuff running on software that's built by a few people doing it on their own who are not getting paid, are not getting any kind of cut. And there's not a very obvious solution. Back in, I think it was 2017 or 18, I can't remember exactly. I invested in what was then called OS Coin, now called Radical, right? Who were kind of trying to go fix this problem by, first of all, having sort of a decentralized GitHub. And people will say, oh, Git is decentralized, yes, but GitHub likes the public facing kind of collaboration tool, and publishing website is not. And then on top of that, they wanted to do kind of some sort of like revenue sharing mechanism for that. I'm not 100% sure what's going on the payment side. I know they were doing sort of like, we were thinking about doing some like tipping style stuff, which we very quickly get into the root of the problem, which is that um, if you're not relying on altruism, then you're kind of relying on forcing something, which makes it a more difficult sell for anyone to use that, right? Because if you're, just to have a very simple example, if you are a developer and you sort of just prototype something small, whatever, you use a couple open source libraries, um, you don't really want to immediately start paying for those. That's not, I don't think that's the intention of the people who maintain those libraries either. But then if that becomes a thing and starts to become valuable, there's like, first of all, how do we even know how that value should be split? Like you're assigning some, it's like if some person is successful, how much was I a part of that success? It's very, hard to
Yeah.
quantify in any real way. And then so it's very hard to reward. But anyway, maybe moving on, or as a last thought on that, maybe as a quick comment on the overall topic of having guests on the channel. I did struggle a bit. I mean, I struggled with my network issues and whatever, but I also struggled from a social perspective, um, because we do this in a very like unmoderated way. And the moment there's a third person, it's harder to have them be a part of it without any kind of moderation. And so I was sort of felt like I had like kind of jump between moderator and narrator, sort of. And that was sort of tricky. I don't think I did a very good job of that. But
The conversation went well enough.
yeah, it was a good conversation, but it was a bit of a struggle, and it was a little bit harder to sort of naturally move the conversation along because like the baton had to be passed very explicitly every time.
I that might not just have been on you for what it's worth. And Andre himself mentioned that the podcast that he has showed up to, they usually have more of an agenda. So it might be just an issue that we need to kind of like warm up the guest to the usual conversation thing beforehand. We did it a little bit with Andrew, which I think helped, and we did it without planning to. I think that helps. So that's probably something that we need to do in the future. Just basically shoot the shit with people for like 15 minutes before we throw them at the actual podcast.
Yeah, that's probably right. It could be that they need even a little bit longer than 15 minutes. Maybe, you want to somehow you want to bring the level of conversation to the right. I don't know why I'm making like a down movement, but like you want to bring the level of conversation down to a point where everyone feels comfortable that they can say really stupid things.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and this wasn't the case with Andre, again, to his credit, but something that I've seen in some cases when I've interviewed people in the past is that if you're talking about a topic that they are very familiar with, which is usually the case when you have someone who's really good in about their particular domain, and they have been asked about it before, then they have these things in their head where they just kind of like press play and they just play back whatever it is that they usually say when the question comes up. So maybe what we need to do is get those out of the way quickly so that we get them to the unscripted part of the session.
that's a fair point. Yeah, people, especially people who pitch a lot, will have like a script that they can just read. And to a degree, that's good, right? Like you want that makes it easy to start because you have this sort of pretty scripted thing that you usually say, especially as an introduction. But that's true that may want to try and get most of that out of the way before we even record. But anyway, we should jump into things. There's so much going on, man. It's just it's been such a beautiful 2 weeks. There's just controversy, there's espionage, there's like, oh my gosh, it's amazing. There's taxes.
There's people
it's incredible.
funds.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't even want to touch on the what are they called? The twins from Solanas.
No, Macarinaos.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I don't want to go there because honestly, I don't think that story is that interesting. Like it's crazy, but it's not that interesting. So okay. There was the Avalanche Internet Computer shit show, or shall we say the Evan Gunsirer, however you say his name, and Dominic Williams and Kyle Roach shit show, which was, I mean, honestly, some of the most like wacky stuff I've seen in crypto today, and I have seen some wacky stuff. So, quick context. On cryptoleaks.info, this website that sort of purportedly leaks things, sort of like WikiLeaks or whatever, right? And they seem to have a bit of an agenda, but whatever.
A bit.
Yeah. I know. So I don't know at all. Like they've only done like 3 leaks and whatever. And I do think that sort of stuff is probably helpful in the long term for the industry to expose some of the murky dealings. I'm not sure these guys are doing it from, like the goodness of their heart. Um, but whatever the case, they had this leak and basically they had a whole bunch of videos of Kyle Roche, who's this lawyer who's been associated with the Avalanche Network and the founder of the Avalanche Network. And basically, the videos showed him saying all kinds of outlandish things that would not be cool to say publicly. And I guess painted a narrative that was supported by this video evidence to a large degree that the Emin, the founder of Avalanche, had basically like had a secret agreement with Kyle Roche for Kyle to go and sue like every other competitor of Avalanche in class action lawsuits. And that is what he's been doing. to to be fair. And of course, Emin and Kyle denied these allegations. Funniest thing was that Kyle denied these allegations, even though there was a video of him saying this shit.
He said it was selectively edited.
Well, no doubt it was, but like,
Yeah,
you're still on video saying all kinds of shit. And just to paint the full picture before we really dig into this, it then was exposed that Dominic Williams, the founder of Internet Computer that used to be called Definity, had contracted some like weird ass spy guy, as far as I can tell, to like manipulate, to collect this video based evidence and come up with ways of extracting it, which is just completely bonkers. And I don't know, like, it's starting to get to like a Game of Thrones level, like secret feuds and like stuff. I don't know. I found it very, very entertaining.
it's worse. This is pure politics, election time bullshit, only happening continuously. It's amazing, really. Okay, so first of all, for those that don't follow the whole Avalanche thing, one of the things that made this whole thing believable up front is that there is, let's say, some tribal mentality in general across most people and most blockchains. Like Ethereum, there are some Ethereum diehard believers who believe like Solana's a scam, and Bitcoiners think that everything else is a scam and this kind of stuff. It tends to be the communities, right? It tends to not be the founders. And the case of Avalanche, basically, it comes from the top. Just his Twitter is pretty much why everything else is absolute shit except Avalanche. So there's this
Yeah.
mentality in the community that he has fostered, which made this whole thing more believable upfront. Now, saying that CryptoLeaks has potentially an agenda, come on, man. It's like saying a butcher has an interest in selling you meat. They have 3 leaks. One of them is SPF is being mean to Internet Computer. The second is the New York Times is being mean to Internet Computer. And the third one is Avalanche is paying a lawyer to be mean to Internet Computer and other people too. So, yeah, might be a little bit of a common trend in these things.
Yeah.
But it's completely crazy. And the guy is not just like a spy guy. Actually, it seems to be like a self-styled, what was it, Swedish tycoon? I think it's one of those Nordic countries. I forget which one. Anyway, some self-styled
It wasn't
Norwegian.
That's for sure.
Self-styled Norwegian tycoon, one of those people who just show up and the Wikipedia page, that there's something fishy because like the second line of their Wikipedia page is Joe Bob is recognized as an internet expert on like 12 things, just missing brain surgery. I'm like, sure, completely legit.
It's the best LinkedIn profiles are like, Web3 AI speaker dad. Or nowadays it's not Web3, it's metaverse.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know. But just like the actual practical reality of making that happen, like it's not a good thing, right? Like people doing this to each other is not great. In this case, I think both sides are complete douchebags, and so that's why I find it entertaining. Like Emin, I've followed him on Twitter since like a very long time ago, before Avalanche, and he used to have sort of like he was pretty Ethereum centric. He had a pretty nuanced take on different kinds of things, and then Avalanche launched, and then it's just shill. like only shell, exactly what you described. Everything else is bullshit except for Avalanche, even though, as far as I know, 80% of Avalanche traffic is from one game, which moved from the main um, sort of subnet to its own subnet and has like 4 validators or something.
Yep.
Like, it's not looking good. And then on the internet computer side, it's just like the way they've gone about launching and doing all this stuff is just anyway.
Like if anybody hasn't seen it, there's the video launch, the video of like the official ICP launch. It's a thing of beauty. It's like a high school parody of the Starship Troopers infomercials. It's like this couple actors completely scripted thing. Like, Joe, remember back when we were at when Divinity started? Like, oh, the Divinity started. Like, yeah, Jill, definitely. I absolutely remember sitting back there with Dominic. It's like such a bizarre thing, that is worth watching by itself.
But what I find really funny is that like this Norwegian guy, like actually strapped some sort of hidden camera and then like lured Kyle Roach into multiple meeting where he like had, I guess, planned some kinds of questions that would hopefully lead to good results. And then I don't know, that's just very funny to me that someone would bother to go to all that trouble. I'm only assuming he's going to get a ton of money for it because, obviously it was going to be a shit show. And the guy was bound to get exposed, right? Because
Yeah.
Kyle knew who he was, right? So, anyways,
but you just get paid. That's it. And but
yeah.
the thing that we keep forgetting is that these things are not just like altruistic open source projects trying to further civilization. These are multi-billion-dollar business. So of course people are gonna go stab each other in the face if they get half the chance.
Multi-billion-dollar businesses that are working on these massive internet computer projects where for a long time validators were paid by a traditional payment rail. I don't know if that's still the case. It could be, who knows? But I remember when they launched and that was happening, I was just like, come on, guys. like really, you need to hit this bull run that bad. And then there was all kinds of sketchy stuff going on. Like, day one of launch, Internet Computer was like 8th on the coin market cap list, like instantly. That there is shit that is like in the billions that they don't show on the front page. And Internet Computer specifically just pops up everywhere immediately at a specific price, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's no finding the price. It was like we put this valuation into the minds of everyone so that it becomes reality. And it worked, to be fair, but it's just such a demonstration of like faction channel dealings that I don't know.
It worked for most
Cringy.
people who got too dumb because the chart was like a continual downhill slope after that. So.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, that was a very entertaining thing. Of course, okay, there's a lot of stuff happening. I think the other sort of very dramatic thing we could discuss is the MakerDAO endgame plan, which I gather you're not aware of.
I mean, endgame. Is this the multi-DAO sub-DAO thing?
Yeah, that, but some more dramatic twists. So, a little bit of context. At some point, Rune, who's the founder of Maker, said on some Discord that they should just YOLO their entire treasury into ETH and DPEG die. And then he like publicly went back on that. But now he's published a blog post like a week ago or something, where he is actually basically proposing that in a slightly more measured way, but still. So Rune thinks that that governments are going to try to shut it down, which is probably true on some time frame. And he further is worried because uh, like this was triggered by the tornado cache thing. And I'm guessing he's worried that tornado cache ETH is going to end up in Maker and somewhere in Maker CDPs or the price stability module or something.
Yeah, sure.
Um, and I think it's relatively unclear whether the government is actually going to do anything about that, because that ETH is just going to end up everywhere. It might just be, it might just be like, okay, we did this tornado cache thing, and the core sort of problem was mainly removed, etc. And money, but it does create some interesting dynamics. Like if you stick tornado ETH into a Maker CDP and you get a DAI, can you then put that DAI into Kraken and sell it for euros? I'm not sure. And what would Kraken do? I mean, honestly, if you wanted to get money out of somewhere, Kraken is probably the place to go, given the CEO is pretty diehard on a lot of things. But that does create a lot of interesting problems, because we can do like synthetics on top of synthetics on top of synthetics, like where do you where does it end? And quite possibly that is just kind of ignored until there's another thing that gets to have the same sort of reputation as Tornado did, right? Which I think is more likely. In any case, Rune is worried about that. So Rune's plan is to remove USDC over some time horizon from the system, depegging from USD in general. I think that those kind of go hand in hand. Making the whole team anonymous and decentralizing everything. Basically, try to make Maker actually unstoppable, which it obviously is not right now. And this involves all kinds of crazy things, MetaDAOs, which, if I understand correctly, are basically taking like core teams from the Maker overall team and making them DAOs in themselves with their own token and so on and so on. So you could imagine like the Oracle team, it becomes like one team, and then I guess the Maker protocol kind of pays that team for something. So that's the plan. But just quickly, I think if you depeg from USD, Maker basically goes away. But what do you think?
Well, DAI's whole reason to exist is to depeg to something, right? Otherwise, you might as well just be using ETH. So I am not entirely sure what the reference point would be here. I guess they could take a page out of Libra's book and try to establish it based on a basket, on Presper currency basket, right? Which I think is just going to piss more people off than the US. But
I mean, but so a little while ago, Rune's plan was still to get real world assets into Maker.
forests, yeah,
Forests and like bonds issued by some bank and like stuff like that. It's complete, 180 on that. But I think the more critical thing is like, if the risk really is jail time to work on Maker at some point in the future, how many people are going to do it? You can be anonymous and whatever, but like, it's going to be tiny.
Yeah, and anonymous only. The issue with anonymity is that you only have to be exposed once, right?
Yeah.
One slip up, one fuck up, you post from the same Twitter account, from the wrong Twitter account, now you're screwed. Right. So, or you commit to GitHub with the wrong key or whatever it is. So I am not sure that it's trivial to get full anonymity, particularly on a project of Maker scale, right? Where I imagine you can trace like, Tom, Dick, and Harry were the people mostly maintaining this module, and now there's 3 anons maintaining the module. Like, I wonder who those people are. right? If you were bringing up a project from scratch, then maybe. So anyway, if the risk is gel them from forward to the maker, they're pretty fucked. If the risk is Ether, like maker being frozen out of the USDC assets because they end up on the same vault as Tornado Cash ETH, then actually it seems like a solution for that would be the bonds thing. Just basically completely abandon ETH to like stick to that side of things, and then just have a die on top. Yeah, I am not sure that would make DAI any useful at all, right? But it would allow it to survive. So I don't know. Maker is one of those projects where for the longest time I have really not been bullish on at all. I mean, pretty much since they added USDC, I just figured this is gonna blow up in their faces at some point, and then just dumped the maker that I had and walked away basically.
Yeah, it's tricky because it is like, so as I think my view is that we have an opportunity now to either integrate with the real world by, you know, playing nice with governments. That doesn't mean we design systems that governments can control outright, but at least let them, like, you know, have some measure of success in doing the things they want, they say they want to do. The other option is to go full dark mode, which is what Rune is proposing. And it, it does strike me that that is going to be a minuscule portion of the sort of entire thing. And then I think Maker does have an opportunity to go in the real world asset route. And they've already gotten a lot of legitimacy on that front, like with actual banks doing stuff with them, which they're now completely throwing in the bin. And the other thing that I find sort of interesting about this is that because it's a DAO, all their plans are on a forum that anyone can read, right? Like, how good is the secret society whose plans are all online? Like, I don't know. It's sort of like the Constitution DAO thing. Like, your opponent can see like exactly how much money you have and so on. And anyway, that it's worth a read though, because it is like, that is one direction that some projects will take. I personally think it's a significant mistake, um, but some will go that route, and we'll see what happens. Like that, at some scale, if it worked, right? If they just could keep growing bigger and bigger, even while being sort of not under any government's purview at all, they could maybe challenge governments. I think that's the idea. But getting there without government stepping in is basically impossible, right? We're not even close yet.
Yeah, you may want to look into Hubble Protocol. It's a Solana based protocol, kind of like a similar goal of having basically a decentralized stablecoin, which what you do is that you basically get a loan based on collateral. That's pretty much it effectively. It is much.
So Faber has a stable coin as well. So like,
Yeah, it's kind of like that. Just on focus. They don't do USDC as collateral for obvious reasons. They do things that are in theory the centralized collateral, like Ethereum and Bitcoin. But that the moment that get bridged to Solana, it stop being decentralized. But they do Sol as well, right? So you could do it based on that.
So the thing is, just waiting on the next wormhole hacks.
It's a possibility. The thing is, this is a named team with investors just trying to toe a particular line, right? These are not people who are going to go out and go full dark mode tomorrow. I expect. I don't know, really. Like I am all for people starting projects completely anonymously now, starting them from scratch, or people coming in and forking Maker and doing their own thing. I would be surprised if Maker itself transitions smoothly into a fully anon DAO things. But we'll see.
Probably not. Probably not. And this is a good segue into Michael Saylor, and I'll explain why.
Mr. Mastermind who shows up on a Twitter space to announce his plan to not pay taxes.
I don't even know all that context, but so they've been going around saying that like your crypto can't be taken away from you because you can memorize your passphrase and just be like, sorry, I don't have it, which is like so stupid. It's like the biggest point of failure in your security is you. and um and unfortunately, like if it's all reliant on just you, it is very easy to compromise your security. I can just come to your door with a baseball bat, which I won't because I don't care, but someone might, and be like, please hand over the passphrase you've memorized. And hopefully he hasn't actually done that. Um, if he has, it would be dumb. But even if he hasn't, but he says he has, it's also dumb because someone might come hit you with a baseball bat anyway. Um, but it's just like that. That's just not true. Like you, somehow, I think crypto people have like completely removed themselves from reality and the fact that there is a monopoly on violence, and the government can come and tell you, give us this thing or else, and then eventually you'll give it to them like 99% of the time, right? Like how many of us are willing to withstand torture to not hand over a few words? I don't know.
Look, first of all, this is a well-known term. It's called rubber hose script analysis, which is the easiest way to decrypt any system is that you find somebody who has the password and you beat them with a rubber hose until they give it to you. So it's not like this is a new thing, right? First of all. Second, Saylor I wouldn't call Michael Saylor a crypto person. Michael Saylor became a crypto personality just because of his, I don't know, bad salt fueled rants and about, you know, cyber hornets protecting the electricity queen, or I have no idea what the fuck. It was like a borderline more coherent John McAfee who actually still control a treasury to put into Bitcoin, and that's what he became a personality. So there was that. I wouldn't call him a crypto person, and I've seen interviews where he basically has a fundamental misunderstandings of basic inner workings of crypto.
Yeah.
But it wasn't even like you can't take my crypto from me. He on it was one of the videos that I sent you. He's saying something like, "Oh, I forgot my password, so I lost my crypto, so tax that." In the context of um, somebody posted in the context of now the state of Washington is coming after him for not having paid taxes over 10 years. Which let's say that is true. Let's say that you live in a country that's not necessarily going to beat you with a rubber hose. And I'm not entirely sure that the United States qualifies for what it's. But let's say that you live in a country where you have.
Arguably not.
Yeah, probably not. You're going to get boarded, not rubber hose. But, let's say that you live in a country where you have the absolute certainty that's not going to happen. Unless crypto is the only asset that you own, maybe don't go on a public broadcast and brag about how you're going to use it to avoid taxes, because they're going to come after your fucking house, which I don't think you get to claim that you forgot the passphrase for the deed.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, come on. Like, okay, so thinking about just the allegation of tax evasion, it is a little bit weird because like seemingly at least everybody seems to think he doesn't actually live in Washington. Um and so maybe it's completely spurious, but even regardless of that, like putting yourself into that position by saying those kinds of things, everyone is going to come after you. You're giving like a reason for governments and then both like federal and local to just come check, just make sure, because you're basically saying like that's what you're doing. So like someone's going to come and be like, well, okay, hand over the files. Let's just see what you've been up to. And I don't think in his position he wants that to happen unless, like I said, I think in episode 2 or something, or 1, I can't remember, uh, unless he's the martyr that's going to die on his sword.
Yeah, but again, this is not a martyrs. There are a few martyrs that aim for that. The majority just happen to stumble into that position. I think this guy is basically just trying to sound cleverer than he is. This kind of shit gets the cheap seats at clapping. So
Well, he's repeating like the crypto narrative from like 2011, right? And it's not the same. The world isn't the same. The crypto community at large is not the same. Most Bitcoin holders do not think that way, I would argue. There's more in the Bitcoin community than in other communities, but like it just seems like so there was an article on CoinDesk. I can't remember who it was by, but it was like basically the gist of it was like we need to start doing something about all the like sketchy shit. Like we're way too accepting of like as an industry of sketchy shit, and I completely agree with that. And it's sort of perpetuated by these sorts of things. These people who loudly proclaim they're gonna do X, Y, and Z, which is probably illegal. Like I have this same issue with Balaji right now because he keeps going around talking about how like the crypto network state is gonna like take over the world or whatever. It's like even if that's your plan, which like I have a huge amount of issues with his actual plan, but let even if that is your plan, why would the best strategy be to say it out loud very publicly as a public figure? It's like if Elon Musk said it's like if Elon Musk said publicly that he planned to overthrow the US government. Like that's that's not that's not good strategy. Like and probably shouldn't try that anyway.
but Malachi's case is a little bit different, I think. I agree that it's easy to paint it in the same way, but um, at the very least, and I may be giving him the benefit of the doubt here just because he doesn't piss me off nearly as much as Chamath, for instance. But the thing with Balaji reads more as not as we need this to happen because of governments, but more about this is the inevitable progression of the way that everything has been decentralized. It's not like the crypto state needs to rise up and tell governments to go fuck themselves. Is that eventually this is where we're going to end up if things just keep progressing in this direction, and we need this 5-6 stages for that to happen. Right? It's less of a war cry and more of a futurist view on things.
I agree. And he's not explicitly saying do something illegal, right? That's not really what I'm trying to insinuate. I'm more maybe just advocating for in an environment where everything is by default open and public. Um, I'm advocating for a little bit more caution in how things are communicated. Not just like, okay, so there's this like extreme idiotic example of like if you were trying to overthrow government, which obviously you really shouldn't do, at least in the West. There are probably countries where that's somewhat a good idea. I don't know.
And if you're gonna do it on an also on YouTube,
Exactly. It's more just like we do need to clean up the image. We do need to do something about the sketchy shit. And on top of that, we need to stop saying all kinds of outrageous things publicly that like the vast majority of people just can't get behind. Like one major blocker for crypto adoption and scale is that crypto people are so fucking weird. And they just have all these like outlandish things where they're, and it's not that like, you, like let's take all the crypto people that talk about monetary theory and like inflation and all that. So they might be correct in a lot of areas, but going around saying that the United States dollar is going to be worth zero, which a lot of prominent crypto people do go around saying, mainly more OG, but still, um, that's not like to the vast majority of people who have US dollars in their bank accounts, whose like pensions are in US dollars, who bought all their houses in US dollars, et cetera, et cetera. It just sounds absurd. And so for them to get excited about crypto, hearing those kinds of narratives, and of course, all the whatever old school money laundering drug stuff, that's not the right way, right? Like the amount of anarchists in the world is limited compared to like the amount of regular people who kind of like would rather there be some structure and order. And maybe they would like to keep their house and stuff.
The problem here is that you say we shouldn't do this and we shouldn't do that, and there's really no we. I mean, yeah, you are talking about people who are. When you say we, it seems like you're referring about people who have an interest in seeing crypto succeed overall. But that's not one block of people. There's people who use crypto and they could just as well be using pretty much anything else. Like, right, like Python Trails was like, oh, decentralization until Libra came up and then they just jumped on the Libra bandwagon. There's people who believe in crypto as a tool of freedom. They would rather, like myself, who would rather not antagonize governments, but coming from a continent where governments tend to antagonize you, it's nice to have an out, right?
Yeah.
And then there's the cultists, the people who like, no, my thing is the only thing that should exist. If it is not Bitcoin, the world is fucked. If it is not Litecoin, the world is fucked, right? And the problem is the cultists. The behavior that you're saying is not the first two groups, it's just the cultists. And the issue with people like Sailor is that they're really good at tapping into the cult mentality because they're a fucking narcissist. And all they want is like people liking and retweeting their stuff. It's an attention thing.
Well, I slightly disagree that it's just the cultists. Like I think there's a general sort of slight detachment from reality amongst a lot of crypto people. And I'm talking about we mainly because I like as a sort of tangential point, I also think it's important that I, I feel like we've lost sight of the fact that we are a very nascent, very disruptive industry. And focusing all our energy on like beating the crap out of each other is not very useful, when what we're actually trying to do is to like get this technology adopted. And everyone has their own, biases and their own bags and whatever they want to see their own network be the network and stuff like that. Even that though, I would argue is a very weird way to look at it, because if you assume that crypto adoption continues to grow, like a lot of these things are going to be very valuable. There's really no downside for anyone unless you're a full-on scammer whose stuff doesn't actually work at all. And so I think that it's also like and this is hard to achieve because of exactly what you're describing. It's a very disparate bunch of different people in different groups, but like we should be trying somehow to build a more unified narrative um, that can sort of appeal to the mainstream. And I would argue that zero of the current narratives appeals to the mainstream. Bitcoiner narrative of like all governments are just gonna die and all the currencies are gonna die and they're, only Bitcoin will be left. That's absurd. Ethereum is way too like, I don't even know how to describe it. Like I like Ethereum because I'm kind of a nerd, but like for most people, like they could care less about zero knowledge proofs and like probabilistic that and this, and it just doesn't matter. Um, and like even going on to Solana, like getting to the edge of physics in terms of like how much can we make this server actually? How much throughput can we get out of this server? Um, and we're sort of going in a better direction, but the actual narrative that sort of like mainstream companies and individuals and whatever will hear and just be like, oh, okay, I get it. That I think still eludes us. And part of the reason is that we have all these weird ass fucking narratives just fighting amongst each other. So anybody who's trying to get into crypto just gets confused and annoyed.
Yeah. For it's worth, this might be because I'm older than you. So to me, this doesn't look, at the to me, the Ethereum community scans very similarly to what the Linux community scanned a few years ago. And it's just
Yeah.
an issue of Ethereum finding its niche, right? And it might be like Linux ended up being, by and large, running servers. Ethereum might end up finding one thing that it ends up hooking up on. Same case with Solana. Like maybe Solana is going to be the content thing, or maybe Solana is going to be like the rails, the cheap rails for something else. I've no idea. We'll see what ends up. The key part is what you said about people beating the crap out of each other, or projects beating the crap out of each other, and this goes back to what we were saying about ICP and whatnot earlier. And this is a problem with crypto that I've brought up before, and with crypto and with token powered projects in general, which is that it made it like the token mechanism and its appeal to greed made it so easy for little nothing projects to raise such an absurd amount of money that if the majority of this were startups and they were wasting their time just fighting each other and maybe not paying somebody to start lawsuits and then somebody else counter paying somebody else to record the other guy. If you were wasting money on that shit, you would go extinct within basically like a year and a half. I don't think you would get to a Series B. The problem with these things is that since they get billions thrown at them, then they get to do this for a while. I think that's okay. I think that if we give this a little bit of time, we're going to find out that the ICPs and the other projects that ended up wasting their time just fighting all that is sure, they made their founders wealthy because they raised stupid amounts of money and the founder paid themselves, whatever salary they pay themselves. But they are going to just fall by the wayside. That's why I pay a lot more attention to the Ethereums and Solanas, where you have Vitalik writing sensible posts,
Anatoly as well.
yeah, and you have
Anatoly is a reasonable guy. Like
exactly, you have
yeah,
Anatoly recognizing the virtues of other chains, right?
yeah,
I'd rather pay attention to those because I see those as the ones that are significantly more likely to succeed, simply because for all the reasons that you mentioned, crypto is already fighting an uphill enough battle. You don't need to make shit harder on yourself by wasting energy on all this bullshit. And I'm so baffled that they think this is a reasonable strategy for whatever fucked up maniacal reason they do.
yeah, yeah. I agree, and maybe you're right. Maybe over time things calm down. So the merge is coming up. That should calm things right down.
Yeah. Cool as little fancies, everyone.
Yeah. So there's a surprising amount of people who really dislike proof of stake. I wanted to just chat about this quickly. I think we're coming up on time. Um, but first of all, there's a lot of misinformation about proof of stake that's being propagated by a lot of Bitcoiners. And then there's people that do kind of understand it, but they dislike it. And it's sort of interesting because so the common problem Bitcoiners and proof of work advocates have is that they see proof of stake, or they often say that proof of stake is like a circular thing where like um, the one with the tokens decides on what gets into a block, and then it's rewarded with more tokens. So this is a security argument primarily. Is that how can that be secure? And Vitalik's argument is basically it's a spiral, not a circle, and that's true. So you get tokens like afterwards, and you provide security now, right? So I don't think that holds up water. But what what is a valid argument, I think, is that proof of stake does sort of solidify ownership in the network in a way where, because you can earn yield by staking your tokens, the ones who are large owners of tokens basically have the ability to remain large owners forever and ever. Um, I'm not sure that's actually 100. Like, I'm not sure that's that different from proof of work. Uh, the primary difference is in proof of work, you need to continually invest into new hardware. And so maybe that's like, so you cannot keep all the rewards you receive. Maybe that's sort of the angle.
Well, I can tell you that the feedback that I've gotten from validators and Solana is that precisely because of the demands that Solana puts on hardware, Solana is a Solana validator choose through NVMEs like nobody's business. So Solana validators need to be continually investing in hardware as well. And it's not like we're talking a Raspberry Pi kind of hardware. So it's the same thing from that side. Second, arguably, this means that the interests of those generating the coins, whatever they are aligned with the network's interests.
Yeah.
Whereas, in Bitcoin, if I have a huge stack of dollars, I get to go out and buy a huge bunch of hardware and mine Bitcoin and dump it to get more dollars, get more hardware. It's exactly the same thing.
That's true. Final argument that a friend of mine presented to me yesterday, which I hadn't thought of in quite these terms, is that they basically argued the proof of stake is not permissionless, which is sort of true, right? Like with Bitcoin, theoretically, you can be in a village in Africa or, in a remote place and just start mining. I mean, that's not, I know that there's not like you need to get the miner from somewhere in practice today. And so that's not permissionless. In fact, that is one of the most gated, um, sort of like privileged communities there is, who gets the miners first when the next generation of ASICs comes. Um, but on a theoretical level, there is some truth in that. But I'm also not sure that basically you need to have Ether in order to mine or validate Ether, which basically means you need to go to an exchange.
You need to go to an exchange, and what you're gonna buy your mining hardware in cash in a corner from Joe out of a cardboard box in a pickup truck. Come on.
Well, exactly. But I think on a theoretical level, like at a small scale, if you could mine on a laptop, right? So that's kind of it's a valid argument, but not valid in practice at this scale.
You could
But it's
mine
an interesting angle.
you can mine Ethereum on a laptop a few years ago. I'm not sure if that's the case anymore. Or at the very least, I'm not sure that is the case that you can mine it to a level where it's going to cover your costs within the laptop. So
No,
forget it. That's like all these theoretical things are bullshit. What matters is what happens in practice.
no,
If in theory proof of work would lend itself to to a network where power is less concentrated, then why is the Nakamoto coefficient of Ethereum so far below Solana's, for instance, right? I mean, we have a completely plutocratic, evil system on this end that requires a significantly higher of institutions to collude than on Ethereum. So, in practice, this argument seems to hold no water whatsoever.
yeah, and I think there's also a basic issue in like if you're actually trying to run a network that will serve potentially billions of people, like you will have some centralization, like in some sense, right? Um, and the alignment thing is very true. I think this is a big problem in Bitcoin mining is that there's no skin in the game per se with the miners. While with proof of stake, Like there's no skin in the game relative to the end user as such. And I think that is actually important. You want the network to succeed because you have a lot of money at stake. While on the Bitcoin side, you want the network to succeed until you like write off those miners. Like how long does that take?
Mm.
Few
I
months?
mean, and you could also stop giving a crap and just shut down the miners right now, which Bitcoin miners do, right? They shut down the miners when it's not cost efficient for them. So,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
it is to Satoshi's credit that the network still survives these things, right? But the point is that they don't have skin in the game. And then there's another great point for proof of stake, which I think it was Eric Wall who made it, who mentions that if you have um, an undesirable party on the network for whatever reason, say you have a large miner with a lot of power because of a particular ASIC that they have, that they have access to, and you think that these people are being noxious to the network. Well, there's nothing that you can do other than change the protocol and the hashing algorithm that the protocol uses as a whole to exclude these miners, right? But that's a one-time operation. That's you only get to do it once, and then they get to come back with new hardware if they want. On proof of stake, arguably the network could vote to slash their stake, which immediately stops the bad behavior. Period.
Mhm.
So there is that advantage to proof of stake as well, which you don't get on the current situation.
Yeah. Okay. I think we should wrap up. Last bit of news: Binance is converting all stablecoins they receive automatically to BUSD. Haha.
Yeah, it interestingly enough that like that sounds more insane than it is. I get the concentrated liquidity argument. It's effectively how FTX operates, right? If you send any stablecoin to FTX, they're going to consider it a US dollar, and you get to cash out to any stablecoin of your choice. I- Interestingly enough, they exclude Tether. They don't consider Tether a stablecoin. So you have like BTC USD and BTC USDT pairs, but they're not going to have like BTC USDC or whatever. So the concentrated liquidity argument holds water. The funny thing is that they're doing it to BUSD, because I'm pretty sure there is not going to be 6 weeks and we're going to see a Binance press release about how BUSD is the most desirable stablecoin because of whatever beautiful properties it has. Because look how the market cap went up all on its own.
Yeah. But it's good marketing. We can discuss this more next time. So let's wrap up. Thank you.